name's Anthony, aka the Caveman. This is the very first episode of Out of the Cave podcast, which is representative in the name as well. So, Out of the Cave, I feel like it's been a long time coming. I spent the last few years, kind of formulating and breaking down, a lot of life's experiences and, events over the last few years to kind of piece together some sort of problem that I've been trying to solve, but also, just a problem that I see kind of in the world. And, I think each and every single one of us are here to kind of solve a unique problem that is unique to our character or unique to our identity. I guess I'll start with how my journey kind of started. I was always kind of thinking along the lines of philosophy, researching things like Carl Jung and his archetypes. Also Joseph Campbell and the hero's journey, which is, my central thematic theme that I use for life as well. And it's a way that I kind of regulate my emotions, but also how I create meaning and connect dots in my own life. And then how I also then use that to relate to business, storytelling, marketing, etc., comic writing and film, which is kind of, my passion. But then also training. My background is in health science, so I created a coaching business. And so even the coaching business that I use uses the hero's journey framework to kind of coach my clients and things like that. So it's been a very strong theme and anchor for my entire life. So there's trickles of that between, my teenage years, always studying things along those lines. But I guess the biggest experience that I wanted to kind of share with you guys today and to kind of put out as my story in episode 1. Hopefully the next few episodes will be with a couple of different people, interviewing them and their story and their experience and their own hero's journey. So I thought, why not start with my own? So it was probably the age of 20, or it was the age of 22, where a couple of friends and I, we booked a trip up to Seal Rocks. This is in Australia, up north of Sydney, about 3 or 4 hours up north. And we decided to have this camping trip, and we had, a lead of some sort to get DMT, which was not such a well-known substance. If you don't know, guys know what DMT is. It's dimethyltryptamate, which is pretty much like a spirit molecule, which you guys can probably watch a Netflix episode on. I think it's called DMT, the spirit molecule, on Netflix. If you guys want to learn more about it, but essentially it's a 10 to 12 minute inner trip or journey into your own psyche, or a journey of the soul, that kind of shines some light on the meaning and purpose of life. My theory is that we actually release this, it's not my theory, but we release this chemical when we die, when we pass away. I think every biological thing actually releases the same thing, which is DMT, when it kind of comes to the end of its life. And so this is where my theory comes in, is that the release of DMT is actually the journey through the fear of death. So it's the killing of the ego. And so Joseph Campbell spoke about this in The Hero's Journey, which is, if you die before you die, you won't die when you die. That actually became very true to myself and very much relevant after this experience. And so I want to share with you, my DMT trip, which was kind of stupid and ignorant when I was younger, but I wouldn't change it for the world. And I guess it's just taken me a long time to kind of figure out what that whole journey meant and how to kind of anchor that purpose into my life. Because it's been very hard, to participate in other ways of life, or the current mundane sort of modern version of the way you do things. And I think right now we can kind of see a collapse in that happening, obviously through currencies, digital currencies, the economic crisis, a lot of places coming out for lease just because of the financial pressure, lockdowns, COVID, all these things kind of now shaping and changing the way we see the world, along with AI. And I think maybe perhaps this is the time to kind of put it all together and to share it. So so we went away to this trip up at Seal Rocks, and I thought for a bunch of doofuses we did quite well. We decided to actually sit around in a circle and go one by one, while each person goes through their 10-minute journey. My journey wasn't too exciting the first time I kind of went into this. Essentially, I remember smoking the DMT and just kind of falling back, like onto the beach. And it's kind of like I got pushed down by someone else's hand, or like not the will of my own. Then I closed my eyes, and this entire, I guess, reality kind of disappeared, and I found myself in a tree trunk. I guess from my readings and my experience into mythology, I guess I associated that with the tree of life, and so it felt like I was kind of journeying through, reality up top, and the surface level of it, and diving deep down to the roots of reality itself. And so I'm going down this tree trunk, seeing like fractal shapes and patterns, and I get to this door, and before the door there is this woman. She's kind of made out of wood, who I interpreted as Mother Earth, and there was also a man a little further back away who wasn't as, I guess, known, or didn't make himself as known. And above this door was written the fear of death. And I remember, if I look up the tree trunk, so if I was looking up to the sky, what I would see is actually the ground below and kind of the guys huddling around me. So it's kind of, I was like looking back up at reality. And I remember I couldn't let go of this reality. It was like I definitely had this fear of death. And so that's where I guess the theory behind DMT being this release of the fear of death and breaking your ego kind of came into it as a subtle version first. So I remember sticking my hand out to try to grab this I guess Mother Earth with Gaia's hand to kind of pull me through, because I did really want to go on the journey. I guess didn't have I was too conscious at the time to actually make that choice. So there was definitely a fear within me there. So yeah, I ended up just popping back up into the real world, back to the beach with the guys. We then played beach tennis and kick footy and all that stuff, which is pretty exciting, pretty like normal stuff. And then I guess out of stupidity and foolishness, we then continued. I wasn't very heavily into this stuff when I was younger. It wasn't like every single weekend or anything. I definitely had, I guess, a more curious mind when I would enter places and things like this and experiences like this through psychedelic medicine and mushrooms and all that sort of stuff. So we then continued on. That was kind of past. DMT trip, cool, 10 minutes done. Didn't think it'd kind of continue on throughout the day. And so we ended up taking like maybe 5-6 more sort of doses of mushrooms and things like that. And I remember hitting this like the pretty much the pinnacle of it, and we were sitting around a campfire, and the guys thought it'd be really funny to put to do like a Russian roulette but with DMT inside a J. And little did I know that even smoking a J at the peak of something is just like not on, or like not necessarily the safest thing to do. I wouldn't recommend it for anyone watching this. So I remember sitting there on this campfire, and this like the J is going around, and it comes to me, and I'm like, oh shit, like knowing my luck, it's probably going to be a bit of DMT in here. And I smoke it. I don't know if there actually was anything in there, but I think I kind of tripped myself out to thinking that anyway, given my luck in these situations. So I smoked it at the very peak, and then I remember I just like went flat back. My head like knocked back, my eyes were shut, and I remember traveling like through this as fast as the speed of light through this tree trunk. The door that was there that said fear of death, that just blew right open, and I just went through this like little episode of like, if you guys remember The Simpsons, where Homer actually goes on a spiritual journey like this himself. His whole body just starts to disappear. Pretty much the exact same sort of thing happened, and all that was left was like, the last thing that go was the breath, which is breath meaning spirit, or inspiration as well. So that kind of ties in a lot of these theories that I want to talk about in coming episodes, where I kind of piece a lot of this together. At the time, obviously, I had no freaking clue what any of this meant. So the last thing to go was the breath, and I remember just like the release of that, just kind of like dissipating into consciousness, or into earth, into the universe itself, and this entire body or idea of who I was, who out of the Caveman or Anthony is, just kind of shattered. And it was like literally experiencing death, but then coming back to life essentially after that. And so that obviously shapes a lot of things and changes a lot of perspectives on the world as well. But essentially, then what I saw, I remember going through like this keyhole that kind of looked like the Christ symbol, going through that, seeing a bunch of lights, speaking to a massive dark being that was kind of like up in the universe. And it was like, I remember bawling my eyes out as well, like literally crying inside. But if you looked at me on the outside, if you were one of the boys sitting around the campfire, you just think I had my eyes shut, just like meditating sort of thing. But internally, I was kind of crying because I had to admit a lot of things that were fundamentally true that I guess we don't want to admit, or we're afraid to admit, and sometimes not even conscious of, that perhaps we're becoming more conscious of these days. But essentially, I had to admit that life, this 3D realm, was an illusion. Obviously, the word Maya comes from that as well. So the illusion, dream time, storytelling, a lot of these things kind of like play a role in all this stuff. And even the character you build, right? So it's like, who are you before the character that you play? It's like, you are the potential before this stuff. So I guess at our core as humans, I believe that we are fundamentally potential, which is like the Big Bang, God, all these things that came from somewhere, that source. We are all attached to that essence. So there was this admittance of like something greater than yourself, that I am not who I am in this physical form. There's something greater than me, and that's an idea, right? It's a belief, and that belief, I believe, is actually the fountain of youth. So if you look back at myth and storytelling, and people talking about like, how do you achieve the fountain of youth? How do you achieve eternal life? I really believe that is a shift in consciousness and identifying with something greater than yourself. So even the identification with God or Jesus or whatever form of religion and story that you want to believe in, that identification with something greater than you is the fountain of youth, and it's how people are actually able to dedicate themselves to their business, to their family, to whatever else it is, right? We very much do this in our lives, where we identify with something greater than ourselves, and if we lack, we feel maybe depressed, we feel a lot of these stress, all these other issues in our life. Maybe it's the lack of identification to something greater, or it's an over-identification to your physical self or who you are and the character you're playing. Which is also true. You are that thing, but there's also something greater to you, and that's that inspiration that you sort of feel, right? So I had to admit that, the world was an illusion, that my family didn't really exist, I didn't really exist, and the letting go of that was very, very painful. But then coming back to this, reality after that experience has been incredibly meaningful, because you realize how fragile it is. And how beautiful it is through the lens of that. And so, a lot of cultures would have an initiation process where you'd enter, adulthood, all these sort of rituals, right, where you shatter the identity of yourself and you become, you take on a greater role. And we do this all the time as well. So it's not just through these plant medicines that we experience this. It's actually happening every single day, right? So, an example of this would be, becoming a father or a mother. You would have to shatter and kill your identity, right? Who you are and the potential of that person, right? So if I were going a certain career path or a certain, a certain addiction to some sort of thing, like, going out clubbing or alcohol and all these stuff that I identify with who I am, I need to let go of that as well, which is a killing of identity in order to become something else, something greater than myself, or greater than who you are right now. So to become a father, I'd have to let go of, going out at night a lot throughout the week with my friends. I'd have to probably work a little bit harder. I should have less time. Let go of my own ambitions, because your child becomes the most important thing. And so these things do happen in our day-to-day life. It's just we don't have that, immense experience behind it through storytelling, through these journeys or psychological journeys, where it becomes very apparent. These are just things that happen day to day. So I believe that understanding the framework of storytelling, in particular the hero's journey, can kind of help us make better choices in our day-to-day lives, also give our lives more meaning, connect the dots between things that happened in the past and that's going to happen in the future and in the present. It kind of puts you in that middle way, which is, as the Buddhists would say, and even what Christ consciousness would be, is that middle path. So you have, good, evil, and the center. You don't want to be too good, because that's also tyrannical. and it kind of like flips over on the spectrum, right? So you can be, you can pursue good things and have these great ideals that you then impose them on other people, that then makes you the very thing that you're trying to actually fight, which is the whole thing with politics right now, right? So if you go so far left, you end up right. If you go so far right, you end up left. And this is where those kind of things blow up as well. So yeah, I guess the future episodes from here, I want to be interviewing people that have, I guess, a similar sort of point of view, but also to challenge that point of view as well, and to give you guys a bit more perspective on these things. But then also tailor them to the hero's journey, because I think the hero's journey, for me at least, is such an easy framework to kind of work in. So for example, what I mean by that is, and what that is the hero's journey is a framework developed by Joseph Campbell. I may have mentioned that before, but essentially it's a monomyth. So it's looking at, the story of Jesus, Buddha, it's looking at Spider-Man, it's looking at Batman, it's looking at your own day-to-day life. It's looking at pretty much every single story, Star Wars, everything like that, and combining all those stories into one monomyth structure. So we'll take Shrek, for example, and I guess I'll lay out the framework for you. So you have an ordinary person, which is yourself and myself, and you start your day as your ordinary version of yourself. You wake up in the same bed, you wake up in the same house, or hopefully you do. So that's the ordinary, it's the mundane, it's the known world. And in the known world, which is structure, right? Because what is structured is known. Meaning you can find those places to live in, meaning deteriorates because it's known to you. And so to find meaning in your life, which is what this story is about, is you have to constantly confront the unknown. You have to constantly stress yourself out and challenge yourself and kill parts of yourself and grow. Essentially, it's a story of transformation. And if we're not doing that, if we're stagnant, if we're staying still, then that's where you start to feel depressed, because you're not living up to your greatest potential, essentially, or living up to that story framework, right? You want to tell a great story. People are interested in stories, Instagram stories, all these things like that. You're sharing what you did every single day. And that's what the hero's journey is, right? It's ultimately participating in an adventure to develop greater parts of yourself and lessons about life itself, and then to share that. So going back to the very beginning, you have the mundane world. I'll use Shrek as an example because I find that's one of the easiest ones to use. You have Shrek, who's the ordinary, who's you and I, in his swamp. That is also our home. You have these outside external factors, which is chaos, creep into the world, and you tend to find the hero will deny the call. The reason they deny the call is because it's quite comfortable where you are. There's no reason to leave where you are. It doesn't actually make sense, right? The journey to the unknown, it doesn't actually make sense to do that, right? So what tends to happen is something chaotic happens in someone's life, like a death of a family member, a breakup, losing your job. These sort of things can be mirrored in Shrek's story, where he loses his swamp. So there's a refusal of the call, and so they're kind of pushed onto the journey unwillingly, right? So they're on this journey now. So now Shrek then meets Donkey, who is the meaning of the mentor. And this is how I guess I would structure my coaching sessions, was I would act as the mentor, helping someone cross from the known world, what's their usual routine, to help them develop a new routine. But to develop a new routine, you need to develop new skills, new ideas of yourself and potential of what you can be. And the most important thing, I guess, is just the belief that you can become something more than yourself. And that there's something greater than yourself that can help you do that. So that's the actual interaction with the world greater than you. And when you interact with the world in that way, and you can model yourself to actually adhere and deal with those consequences and trials and errors, which is the next step of the hero's journey, that transformation process is what you then give faith into, right? So you have this journey. Shrek goes out with Donkey. They go into a quest, so they're crossing the known world, which is the swamp, to the unknown world, which is adventure and creativity. And so the funny thing about this as well, right, is you have two sides of the brain. I'm going to generalize this to make it a bit easier. So you have the left and right. The left would be the logical mind, which is analytical things. It makes sense of things. It's logic. It's analyzing data. it's very structured. It categorizes things as well. So it's generally used for categories. And so that is related to structure, security, safety, and all those things, which is one aspect of that, right? If everything has a yin and yang kind of essence to it, so if we're looking at structure, the opposite of structure would be then like what structure does as a negative impact is oppression. So you tend to find this with your father, right, or your workplace. Your workplace is somewhere, your home too, is a structured place, but it can also constrict you and make you feel oppressed. And so when you interact with things that are structured like that, you need to understand that they're also going to oppress you in some sort of way. So you're gonna have to adapt and change to that. And so the reason I'm telling you this is because I guess for a lot of my life, I guess I would recognize patterns of behavior that would be quite oppressive in the future. And so it's better to make the decisions to leave that and journey into the unknown as opposed to staying somewhere that isn't necessarily healthy for you to stay. Or vice versa, you're able to identify where it's imbalance and incoherence with those things. The opposite would be creativity, right? The unknown, so the right side of the brain, which would be to do with pattern recognition, so it's making sense and meaning of things, and the amygdala as well, which is another part of the brain that turns on when you're confronting the unknown or you're in fight or flight mode as well. So it's when you encounter the unknown is when you actually develop meaning into your life, because you're more alert there, right? If I know, if I know what time I'm gonna get up, know the work I'm gonna do that day, I know the people I'm gonna see, I know what's on TV, these things tend to lose meaning. It's not because they're not meaningful, it's because they're safe. There's no need to draw attention onto that anymore, right? Because that's stable and secure. And so that's why we tend to take things for granted as well. Things that are actually stable, secure in our lives, we take it for granted because our brain doesn't need to focus on those things. Our brain is always on alert and on search for things that could destroy the known, right? So if you're looking for meaning, you need to look at what can destroy the unknown, which is the opposite part of creativity, right? Which would be destruction. So the feminine aspect now, which would be the motherly, the caretaking, all those sort of things. And so I want to distinguish the difference between masculine and feminine here. We're not talking in terms of biology, we're talking in terms of metaphorically speaking, in terms of energy. But I guess some people would use, and I think it's actually a mistake, in modern day times they use this terminology of chaos and order, which Jordan Peterson would refer to. I would prefer to use order or structure and creativity, because I think that is still a feminine word, a feminine energy to it, but it kind of takes out the stigma of being chaotic. However, I can understand and see that point of view. Creativity and destruction, right? Because Mother Nature is destructive but also gives life and it's very creative. So in terms of energy, that's what we're speaking about. We're also speaking in terms of hot and cold. I know I'm going off track here to the story, but I tend to do this. And this is why I guess it's quite hard to put this together. But essentially, right, you have hot, cold. So the hot being yang, right? So it's very energetic. And so if you wanted to do something, right, which is a very masculine energy to do, you have to heat up the body, right? And if you were to heal something and to nurture something, you would cool it down, so you'd ice it, right? So that's where you kind of see the masculine symbols of the sun, which is a masculine thing, the father, and the moon would be feminine, which is the mother. Again, this is very different depending on where you are in the world, because the role of the sun would be different depending on where you are geographically, right? So if you're in the desert, the sun's going to be very hot and punishing. If you're in the Amazon, it's going to be like life-giving and nurturing as well. So this is where you have the different masculine and feminine roles kind of interchange depending on the human experience at that time and place. So these things are transferable. They're not necessarily one thing or was very structured in that sense. But it helps to have these categories. It helps to have structures, so we can communicate to one another. So that's why we actually have categories and labels on things. That's why I use the name Anthony, you use your name. That's why I say this is a comic and things like that, so we can communicate. But is it actually that thing? No, it's energy. It's there's something more to that, but it doesn't discredit. It shouldn't take away from its essence, but it also shouldn't be ridiculed or criticized for having the category there in the first place, because fundamentally it's all for our benefit. It's all trying to help us understand and get to where we want to go on our journey. So you have Shrek, who goes out with Donkey. They go on these trials and errors. He then confronts aspects of the divine masculine and divine feminine, the toxic masculine and toxic feminine, which then shape his character. And you get to this point, or the hero gets to this point, where he has to give something up in order to attain something, right? So you'll find this is the case for many things in life, right? So if I wanted to attain $1 million, I'm probably gonna have to give up a certain part of myself that's stopping me from attaining that $1 million, which could be my addiction to alcohol, my addiction to spending, subscriptions on Netflix and things like that, whatever else it is, right? So there are parts of yourself you will need to give up in order to attain something, which is the whole idea of sacrifice comes into it. And the word sacrifice coming from the meaning of to let go of. So to decide, every time you make a choice or decision, you're essentially letting go of something. And so when you see the world in this way of meaning and action and choice, everything you do then matters, because everything you do, you're sacrificing every single moment, right? Me being here, I'm sacrificing doing something else right now. So this also helped me out quite a bit in terms of, I was very much a yes person for a lot of my life. Still am, I still say yes to most things. However, I realized, I don't know where I got this from, but essentially saying yes is the same as saying no simultaneously, because if I say yes to you, I'm saying no to something else. And so it doesn't really matter what you say. If you're a yes person, you're saying no regardless. If you have a fear of saying no, you're pretty much saying no anyway. So you might as well say no if it's genuinely what you don't want to do. I found that quite useful for my life, because it meant I could, integrate more time for myself. I just had to framework that differently for me, because my character's a little bit different, to other characters. Some people can say no, they're more decisive and things like that. I had to reframe the way that I see the word yes in order to say no, funny enough. So they go through this transformational, and that would be a transformational process right there of something that I gained from going on a journey, which is another story which I'll tell for another time. But there's a big moment in my life where I continually said yes to a certain bunch of things, and I kind of went down this road of, I ended up somewhere I didn't want to be. And so I ended up there simply because I said yes to so many things and I couldn't say no to anything. And so I realized the negative, or the consequence of just simply saying yes, and the consequence of just pursuing things for experience. Some things aren't worth experiencing, but then again, it'll kind of come back into harmony, right? I'll switch the other way, or vice versa. So you learn certain aspects. He goes out, he meets the princess. He then comes back on from his journey, and he has to give up, the princess for his swamp, essentially. And so he does that and realizes that it's not actually what you go on the journey for. So you don't start a journey to attain something. The most beautiful thing about the journey is who you are, who you've attained in character is actually the thing that you value most. And so a few things there. One, if you're looking to go into some sort of journey or quest, I guess the answer in that would be the word question. So when you ask a question, this is how we draw in these different story and thematic themes, right? When I ask a question, I'm admitting something is greater than myself, because I'm admitting that I don't know something, right? So already once you ask a question, that sets you up for this narrative in terms of journey and storytelling. And then the word question and quest obviously go hand in hand. And so you have to admit, and you have to be humble enough and have enough humility to admit you don't know something, and then simply start there, right? Like, what questions do you have? And that will take you on your journey. You can simply just ask questions, and you don't necessarily need to even understand the answer or get the answer. It's just taking that next step, which actually then causes motivation. It's then even worth pursuing in itself. And so just questioning things in and of itself is enough for you to get on track, or to feel meaning and connect things into your life, if you were just to start somewhere small, right? That would be my advice on how to do that. He realizes that he became someone else. He's he's changed, and so when he goes back home, the world's different. He perceives it differently, but he's got something. He's realized inner potential of himself, right, Shrek? So now he feels worthy enough to go and fight for the princess and win her love, essentially, and then bring her back to the swamp. And yeah, it sounds really weird, but essentially that's the kind of framework, right? We see this with Buddha, how he then has to go over the wall and sees the real world, and he decides to jump back over the wall and live a life of poverty, and then come back to give back to the people when he reaches nirvana, and then he decides to come back and leaves nirvana. The same thing with Christ. We see the same thing with Luke Skywalker. And if you didn't know, Joseph Campbell was actually hired to work on that movie as well and help him write and develop the story. It's one of the biggest and most impactful stories. And you have Luke Skywalker, his home is destroyed, he then has to go out into a journey. You see this in a lot of different films and movies and comics and stories. And then to relate this to your own day, right, back to that, you start off at home in your bed, you wake up, that's the norm. You leave the house, which is the unknown, I guess, in some sense. You then journey out into the unknown world. You have experiences. You do things throughout that day. Probably on the weekend. During the week, you're probably at work, so it feels more mundane. You don't have that kind of, I guess, that inspiration sort of feeling, unless your work's very meaningful to you. It might not be, but it could be anyway. And yeah, so when you come back at home at night, you sit at dinner table. And you share stories with your family, or you might share things on Instagram now. So these things are sort of evolving. Back then it would have been around a campfire, you would have shared stories around then as well. Which takes me back to my DMT trip. One part of that, I remember like shooting back thousands and thousands of years around the campfire with my mates, but my mates weren't my friends anymore. They were just random tribes people, and each of us had a different role. And I remember sitting there for like thousands of years and just telling stories and sharing stories and understanding different ways of life. And yeah, that was very, very scary. I realized my role in that essence, or that right there, was the storytelling archetype. You have different archetypes, and they also use this in marketing and branding. So what archetype is your brand? And what an archetype is, it's essentially a transpersonal character that's eternal. So an example of that would be the mother archetype or the father archetype in the individual. Which I use for the framework of the hero's journey. So you have the individual, who's the balance between the two, the mother, who's the yin, the father, who's the yang. And the reason they're transpersonal is because the role of a father is eternal, right? So even though let's say my dad, right, he's still alive, love him very much, one day he will pass, and then I will take on the role of a father as well. My son, if I have a son, will then take on the role of a father, and that kind of process will continue. So the role of the father is eternal. The person playing, or the character playing it, is not. And that's what a transpersonal character is, and what an archetype is. And so certain patterns of behavior come with that certain role. And so this makes the world, I guess, somewhat understandable in terms of a storytelling framework, because you know that certain characters in your life, so your boss, is going to act very much like a father. And so certain archetypal structures and personality types are going to come out through that person that might remind you of your father in some sense. And so I believe you can also deal with a lot of these fundamental issues and healings within yourself, no matter where you are, by simply encountering the archetypal version of that. And you can do that through prayer, meditation, you can do that at work, you can do that wherever you are. And so there becomes this again, interaction and meaning with life, because you can start to see the world through archetypal lens, or more spiritual, which would be a spiritual lens too, right? Because these things aren't tangible. The idea, the character of a father is intangible, but we all understand what it is, we all act as if it's real, and it is maybe arguably one of the most real things, these archetypes. Yeah, so I guess that would be a summary of episode 1. And what's to come in the future. So to recap on that, it's going to be episodes around storytelling frameworks, in particular the hero's journey, the moral of stories, and the reason for that is because, and the reason for all of this, right, is because I think that we lack story in our modern day life, and all our stories being conflated or molded together And simply because this is like one of the first times ever, if not the first time ever, that we have different territories, states, countries, kind of all living harmoniously, not living harmoniously, but living together. And we need to live harmoniously together because I guess our story didn't matter before. You know, if a tribe in Australia, through the indigenous tribe, had a story of the dream time, and you know another culture had a belief of Aztec culture, but they weren't interacting with one another, their stories, their individual stories didn't matter because it didn't change their way of living or change their way of life or the interactions with each culture. However, now that we're living, through digital technology and through the information age, we're interacting with people around the world all the time. And so there is this need for a coherent story. And you'll hear Orby Marcus and Rabbi Mark Gaffney talk about this. These are some of the podcasts that I listen to for some of this information as well. And I really resonate with that. This need for a new story or a coherent story for all of us to kind of to shape our lives around. And so I think a lot of destruction through these old frameworks need to happen. And something like the hero's journey, it doesn't discriminate. You know, we can all kind of relate to it. We all watch film, we all watch movies on Spider-Man, heroes. We all have an idea of our original story from our religious backgrounds. And it's just about using that and detaching the literal sense from it now and believing in the metaphorical meaning behind all these stories. And so the reason for this is to kind of put that all together so that we can actually harmoniously live in this world together and understand each other and create better lives and better businesses and better economic systems and finances and everything essentially, and become better people. So that would be one thing, and just simply the lack of meaning I believe that we have, maybe because we are very safe, we're very secure, we're a very structured society, and you know it's very natural for something chaotic to happen to kind of shake things up, which would be the event of COVID, which you can probably cover in another episode, and my take on that, and I will relate the hero's journey and the archetypes to that event, and to tell you my theory behind it and what I believe the purpose of that was, or in a storytelling framework. So that'll be, I guess, the reasons for all of that. Hopefully interviewing some really cool people like Orby Marcus, Jordan Peterson, other people like, other people of that standard and caliber. I would love to get in touch with, simply because I've spent a lot of time listening to their podcasts and I love to actually interview them and I have a lot of questions for them. And then the other thing is, like, I genuinely want to open up a studio or a gym that combines all these different elements together, the elements of air, earth, fire, and water, which will also be sort of archetypes too, and then to help educate people to live a more harmonious and balanced life, would be replicated from Avatar: The Last Airbender series, which I found really enjoyable. So yeah, that's pretty much it for now, and so thank you guys for tuning in. Yeah, awesome. Thanks.